once the people start putting question answers in chat, you will be able to see them. I'll read out all the questions for you.
Chat is available here, but I'm going to keep it closed for now. You tell me if I should open the chat.
Sure. After you have completed your lecture, after that I'll open the question answers. I'll read out the questions.
Recording is started.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you are aware about today's session by Dr. Michael. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Michael to you. Michael is a registered architect in New York State and in India. He grew up in Vancouver. He's a Canadian as well as Australian. Dr. Michael studied at Columbia University for his MSc in architecture, and he has done his doctorate from Vienna. So we know that he has his global for all of us. So we all know that relationship of architecture practice and architecture and nature is very deep rooted in our existence.
Very hard to hear.
Hello. So, but there has been a shift towards technology for past many years, especially after Industrial Revolution, and we kind of practicing architects are kind of ignoring the nature and not giving its due. So this is going to be a very interesting lecture. I know Dr. Michael. I've attended his lectures and talks before. So I'm really curious to see this presentation. Welcome, Dr. Michael. Thank you very much for accepting to address all of us here. And you can start your presentation, and then at the end we'll ask you some questions.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me well right now? Is everything going well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So this is in a way, it's a work in progress, but in the sense that things are never finished. And I'm trying to focus a big area of ideas in a way that kind of makes sense and tells a story. And in this talk, I'm definitely going to say some things that are probably not going to be agreeable to everyone. But I think that's how we make sense of the world, by being challenged in a kind of a structure that is designed for discussion and understanding. So as you can see, I'm discussing nature, architectural practice, technology, and the one word that is not here is spiritual practice or spirituality. That will come up as well. Sorry, it's just getting started. Let me see. Okay. I'm going to be reading a text, but I'll be interrupting the text with some comments as I go along. When I discovered architecture at the age of 16, I knew that that was what I will do. However, the path to really realizing that in practice is personal. And like anyone who goes out to become a master, there are many jobs that do not require that kind of personal attitude. My goal was to be in a profession that demands personal integrity, and I felt that this one is it. But I've grown to know that this is not always true for our profession of architecture, and that this approach is a personal choice. Over time, because of that professional choice, or that choice to be personally involved, I needed to correlate my personal intents with the profession, and that feeling became stronger. So I worked for quite a few years doing a lot of different things across the profession. And I've put a few slides up that shows the kind of work that I've done, which includes design and then building the model myself and constructing exhibits and all kinds of wooden buildings, mainly wooden buildings, because I'm Canadian and North American and wood is big there. And then more experimental model making like this, which came out of my experiences at Columbia, where I'm trying to develop spaces and understand how space, architecture, and material come together without dealing with roof, window, door, and all of those things. That was a big part of my experiments to do with architectural process, taking the idea of studio to its extremes to find out how far you can go. But there are also really big projects with big budgets. Museum of Glass at Corning is one of the programs or plans, let's say one of the projects that I worked with programming and doing the initial design work for, and then lots and lots of small projects all over the place. But that feeling of needing to find a kind of a meaning which goes beyond just what you're doing as a practice, beyond just studying how to do design, was really important. A recent peak in my work was the doctoral study that I did at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, which I completed in 2016. And it stands for the salutary result of all these decades in practice. It is, however, only a beginning, not an end. In the doctoral research that I did, I looked at what architectural value is. And to this issue, I had to do two things. One is to realize what technological value is, as the architectural profession uses a technological proxy to express its own value. The difficulty of the architectural profession to assert itself is caused by this working proxy. This would be another discussion, a whole other lecture. I'm just going to state this, that the architectural profession uses a proxy, and it's a technological proxy which stands for its value. The second was to address architecture as practice in a way that I might dissolve the concealment of its value in this proxy. This has to do with architecture's goals and purpose. As architecture is to house human beings in environments, and architecture's superordinate program is aligned with human life's purpose. I utilized another parallel practice to help define these purposes. This is yoga, Raja Yoga, and its antecedents, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Samkhya, Shasti Tantra, the wisdom of Vivekananda and Krishnamurti, and so many others, as well as heartfulness, which is my practice. A simile can be used to explain the application of such practice. Inwardly, we ask, if I am a conscious human being, what is the highest form of myself? Correspondingly, in practicing architecture, we ask, if I am to make a particular place suitable for conscious human life, what is the highest aspiration for its form? So architectural value is to provide for supporting the highest value. It is inseparable from, but differentiated from, spirituality, as the environment is places in the world. The realization of architecture aspires the highest goal of making an environment for human conscious life, just as realizing the self within is to realize the highest form of self in a lifetime. The goal of the doctorate that I wrote was to find a ground to continue practice, harmonizing with my own aspiration for life, in my life, and the best results to be attained. That doctorate is called The Goal in Architecture. The goal in architecture is, however, different than the goal of architecture and architects. To understand myself as architect, the goal in architecture is primary. What is that? The goal in architecture is the goal of life, or the goal in architecture is to support life. And if you support life, you support whatever the goal of life might be. That is an issue that a lot of us never ask ourselves about. It takes quite a lot of focus to make headway if we do not simply accept that whatever we are doing is the goal and let the flow of life take us down its path or down its river of time. The practices for answering to the question are also forms of understanding the goal of life or life's purpose. Over millennia, many people have sought higher approach based on their feeling, as I mentioned earlier. Their feeling that there is something more, or their feeling that they want to attain more within. It is a feeling that attracts us to knowing more. The path is long with no end in sight, which in lieu of that, the search or effort or practice and its stages become a goal. The path becomes the goal, which we've heard from Buddhism. It is called sadhana for some, abhyas for others, or worship, and so on. We feel first, then we figure it out. However, today many of us believe that knowing higher consciousness or other esoteric things is simply out of reach or even irrelevant. Much of how we live supports this irrelevance of the spiritual well-being. What makes architecture happen to anyone at a place prepared for that, I mean, a place that has been prepared architecturally, is that it touches our aspiration. We usually consider places or buildings to be architecture, like the thing is architecture, i.e. a building or an object. But it is really an experience that we have at a place. Places that have brought people to feeling architecture is present consistently. Where people feel architecture consistently are called architecture. It becomes common to call those places architecture, but we actually feel something there. At such a place, our awareness perceives a soft or hard jolt of energy. The intensity of aspiration is brought into awareness. It is a feeling, but it is our own energy that we feel. It is a kind of freedom from the coverings of our thinking at a deeper place that relates to a sense of reality and to meaning of life. That is a definition of why architecture has meaning. Architecture's result is about reaching the place of awareness that one can say, or one could say that it is knocking on the door of the existence of that awareness. It is fundamental. People can understand places that are not of their own culture as architecture. We understand Indian temples when we come from the West. We understand the pyramids when we see them, and we even understand some old worn out stones that are 10,000 years old, say in Malta or the Stonehenge, as architecture. We don't need, it's transcultural. I therefore propose that spirituality and architecture are original to consciousness. This was the wider result that my doctorate describes. One is within, and the other is outside us, out in the environment. They are both essential to well-being. I would like to note that any profession that makes change in our environment, which can be said to be material result that any machine or process implies, or medicine, or music, or really anything that we could do, can rise to the level of expressing the highest that we can do, associating with spiritual well-being as architecture does in principle, architecture as buildings. That may include engineering or any branch of technology. Architecture's profession deals with environments that we form usually with or as buildings, but traditionally it also includes sculpture, furniture, vehicles, machines, towns, and cities. As a profession, it is specific. But what architects create is like glass. Architecture is a state rather than a particular material. So for those of you who are not familiar, glass is a condition of a material such as silicon or boron, or in fact even steel, which is not crystallized. Steel beams are usually crystallized steel. If you don't let it crystallize, it's called glass. Anything that is not crystallized is called glass, which is confusing because when we talk about crystal, which might be objects in your, a crystal vase or a crystal sculpture, it's actually not crystal. It's exactly not crystallized. That's what makes it glass. So a little bit of information for those of you who aren't familiar with that. So moving on, I have looked into technology as that encompasses the tools and structures that we use now at a level that will inform this concept of architecture, both as profession and as a higher approach to the creation of environments that support and enhance our well-being. So my approach to nature today also will be in terms of architectural value via technology. So we're really going to focus on technology. What are the values that technology holds? What are its fundamental values, specifically modern technology as we think it today? For example, such questioning requires of a person who considers themselves to be an engineer to understand what the technological component of their work and discipline is. I propose that architects need to understand and discriminate and differentiate technology from what their architecture is and for what the architectural value of that work is. That is, although the value of a built environment is at least dependent on the technological material and process used, and its architectural meaning is at least influenced, we are not clear that we're doing that, and architects often express entirely through the technology that they use. An exemplary way of expressing this, and it's a little bit of philosophy here, so bear with me, I've tried to make it simple. It took me a long time to figure it out. He says, an exemplary way of expressing this is in the way that Heidegger conveys the issues in a text called The Questioning Concerning Technology. He says that modern technology, which coincides with modern architecture, takes the world, or any part of that world that is of interest, in terms of a standing reserve that is formed according to scientific and technological knowledge in terms of the desired outcomes. Modern technological valuation takes required resources up in specific terms of how they will be used as solutions to problems. In doing this, it is concealing what it really is. This means that the need to seek true wholeness and meaning is cut off by a technological assertion of factual measure. By extension, the science that is the basis of technology can only ask certain questions so that all things accord with the measure of things as it is done in objective, verifiable scientific process. What science cannot ask is absent, and this includes what is life? What is love? Why do we live? How does nature work? And so many other things actually that are absolutely fundamental to our existence. Science has no role, none. And what science cannot, so the life in the widest context of a forest, for example, cannot be scientifically ascertained. But the need for wood, its properties and its relationship to the tree's growth and local parameters and structural parameters can be defined. The forest is not a component of the standing reserve beyond its ability to produce wood. So the standing reserve doesn't understand forests. It only understands the forest as a way to produce wood. It understands the ground as a way to produce metal. It understands the water as something to drink or something to make a product within a factory, or as coolant for a power generating facility. But it doesn't understand the river, the ocean, not as a whole, not as a living being. Architects expressing their work necessarily through their technological means may conceal architecture. They may conceal architecture in this way through technology. Architecture will necessarily continue to exist. So it's not gone, it's only hidden, concealed. So we know architecture via this concealing quality in technology, and the architecture is often about that concealment. Many architects, and this is hard to comprehend, I agree, this is not an easy concept. Many architects make architecture of this concealing process. Some postmodern architects, and especially the so-called deconstructivist architects, do this, although it is seldom expressed that way, and it is not consciously expressed, are not philosophers. When Coop Himmelblau proposed works based on a single sketch drawn while blindfolded, it is great fun. Yet the buildings are also powerful. The sketch was drawn in a flash after the project had been researched and discussed to the point where there was nothing left to discuss. Then someone concealed their eyes and made a sketch from their heart, from their intuition. The rules are that the sketch, now named a psychogram, had to be transformed into 3 dimensions, and then all structure and program were developed within that with the faith that the original psychogram already bore all that was needed. The subtle aspect of this that is important to the professional is that it created a one-way filter to the technology that would be used. Technology could only influence by overt permissions on the terms that the architect set via his sketch. The sketch is the filter. It is an approach that other architects such as Frank Gehry use, and it is generally created in a very personal and unique form, which is hard to express, hard to understand. On the other hand, the Seagram Building by Mies van der Rohe is an icon that endures and can be described accordingly. We know this building as a high point of architecture. It is stripped of historical forms, using modern materials and methods to exemplify the modernity of architecture that many architects had struggled to achieve for a century or more. Yet, this is an exceptionally expensive building, having had an unlimited budget. It has decorative bronze profiles at the windows. You can see them there. Many thousands of tons of bronze that are intended to represent a new modern facade. And the facade is an element that conceals the technological needs of the building's structure and systems. Much as OMA's Fundamentals exhibition at the 12th Biennale expressed in 2014. So this exhibit showed in a very ornate room that has a gold-plated or a gold leaf dome, the typical structure that goes into a high-rise building with the suspended ceiling. So they filled up only half the room with that and then let the dome reside above. A building like the Seagram Building has this kind of complexity concealed behind a simple facade. And at that time, Rem Koolhaas, for this Fundamentals exhibit, was trying to show the technology that architecture depends on, but he was not taking an attitude that this is, he wasn't taking a very wide philosophical attitude about it. And we won't go into that either. That's a whole other lecture. The Seagram Building expresses the refinement, purity, and simplicity of modern architecture perfectly. But its materiality and exterior end up as technology concealing more technology. Another architect, John Pawson, is a very sincere contemporary product of this idea, and a great example of refined surface, concealing incredibly sophisticated technology so that on the surface, there is simply nothing to see. It's very, very clean, completely cleaned up in terms of the corners and the joints and everything. But these buildings are designed to last 100 years. They are not going to fall apart. There will not be leaks, and very, very, very expensive. We can see similarities in the subtlety of the Parthenon and its exceedingly high cost as well. They say that the ancient Greek empire collapsed due to the cost of those buildings on the Acropolis. The complex play of how the architectural experience is presenced is a play of technological results required to attain an architectural experience. In this case, architecture of its concealing is an extension of Vitruvian thought. It is a beautiful object presenting to us technological efficiency and power. It purports to be essential and efficient, but as an image of that, it is but a play representing an idea, but its means are very much different from what it appears to be. The issues I'm pointing to are already latent in the result of the Seagram Building. Technology for its own sake is pointless. We can question to what end such architecture as the Seagram Building is working. Why would all that complex technology, resources, and cost go into the Seagram Building, whose architect is famously reported to claim that modern architectural thought accords with less is more? The Seagram Building is at once an icon of architecture that humanity strove for a century to achieve. All the same, it is also artifice and very narrowly relevant to what architecture can actually achieve. Technology, for its own sake, is pointless, as I said. It is always about a problem, a solution, and an outcome. So in the background, we can ask what the problem and the solution and the outcome that the Seagram Building tries to achieve is. What is it? That's another discussion. Until the 1960s, a new technology was generally taken as good. But then unexpected or unexplained environmental damage and damage to humans began to appear, and the questioning began. This information had sometimes been suppressed for profits or by government power. A marker for me is the book A Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, published in 1962, which resulted in the formation of America's Environmental Protection Agency, a leader at that time. Reading that book today is as relevant as it was 60 years ago. The same problems are with us today, despite all manner of scientific proofs and regulations. Testing of technology is now ubiquitous and has become regulated and globally harmonized and unified. We have long not had pure faith in technology. When I was growing up, when I started out, the idea of a new technology was simply absorbed quickly because people assumed that newness, there was a joining of newness and goodness. And that began to fall apart even as I was a child in the 1960s, where people no longer accepted that newness as good. But there are a lot of things that we still think is automatically good, like touch screen phones are automatically thought as being good, but now we're seeing a huge effect on people's brains and the way they grow up. And nobody really knows the totality of it. So it's still going on. It is time that we better understood the role of technology in architectural projects, because architecture is obviously submitted to these problems as well. This is not about studying technologies for implementation, which is what sustainability is about. It is technological value itself that is comparable to architectural value and what we bring to practice. It is this value in practice that is concealed in a way that makes architects ineffectual in providing the real benefit of architecture to society. Obviously, wrongly used or in the wrong hands, technology is destructive. A great many movies and books base their stories on this very issue. Probably the majority. We also harness destructiveness. The atom bomb and chemotherapy are two nuclear examples. We justify much research into harmful, knowingly harmful technology to cover areas that we consider dangerous or urgent. Even defense. We've caused our problems in terms of our wars, and we accelerate them by researching into ever more destructive weapons. Here's where I take a turn to some ideas that are intended to spur thought and introspection more so. I am turning to a viewpoint that accepts the value of solutions to dangerous and deadly issues facing humanity. But the collateral damage of these solutions seems to exceed all measure that we have so far. Technological value is essentially destructive. How can I say this? We extract energy from the world and the life around us to form greater power at focused loci of action to serve us. It is as simple as getting firewood, isn't it? Is this the way we get firewood? We are at another level than mere gathering firewood. We have created a new context with modern technological thought that is daunting in its unintended scope. The essential aspect is that as technologists, we do not consider the source of all that we take to our desired results. There is no fundamentals class in first year of any discipline on our right to take from nature and how to communicate with nature to receive energy and material out of its living being. It is more often overtly defined as not part of the job. The simple way to put it is that we do not take permission. We do not ask. Thus, we operate as thieves. How do we measure what nature can take, what it can bear? Why should we need to? We certainly don't. And we're not able to, because science cannot encompass whatever nature is. Who is going to be able to define our role in nature? Who can define that? Who has defined that in the past? How can we justify ignoring nature with technological value? Is there any science that supports this? When I reference nature, I also mean the human being. We are here as we are due to the will of nature. Consciousness embodied as people is part of nature. So these considerations also pertain to how we treat each other, and our great systems affect all across humanity. An approach to looking at this is to think of the extraordinary power that we have at our fingertips. I used to ride a motorcycle with a power equivalent to 78 horses. Imagine a chariot pulled by 78 horses. If we consider that Ramayana or other such texts, power or powers were got by long work to gain personal merit called tapas, or as boons from deities or otherwise out of the force of nature. They are granted out of a great unknown, which it still is. When such powers are stolen in these stories, it is unjust, and there is a problem that has repercussions. Our technological valuation does not include the humility of our need, despite all of our abilities. We have taken from nature unjustly, and there are repercussions, which in the stories that we have are very severe. We can do nothing without the bounty of nature's never-ending generosity, which does not include stealing from nature, apparently. Theft is not part of generosity, is it? Here I'd like to discuss a book which is about the Vastu, called the Manasara. And taking a very simple part of it, just to describe the relationship between asking and thievery, when the Manasara describes the way somebody who was Ashtapati was expressing architecture, and they were going to use a piece of land, they would first of all come to the land at an auspicious moment, which is very big in history and even today, especially in India, and pray that all the life forms that are presently on this property vacate, that they leave. And once that proper petitioning was done, they would bring grass and wheat and other things and cows and let them live on that land until, as the Manasara says, until it smelled properly. When the land smelled the way it should smell, according to that kind of livestock, according to that form of nature. Once that was achieved, along with some other steps, then the Stapati would come back with a proper ox, dressed the proper way, himself dressed the proper way, and everybody else dressed the proper way at the right time, and he would plow the land. 2 furrows, I think, all around the land, one time, twice around. And from then on, another man had to plow the rest of it, and there were other celebrations done. But at that point only was the land ready for construction. That's the instructions that you get. So if you're building on stone, of course, it would be a different story, but as a general idea. Now, how do we address a piece of property now? Well, what we do is we have a piece of land which was acquired, and then we go to the land and measure it. Essentially, we measure it in so many different ways, from photographs to surveying to other qualities such as sound and whatever we need, the water. Of course, they do that in the Vastu as well, measuring the water and the soil and all of that. Those things are also part of it. So we measure. After that, the architect decides to make a design, and then he goes to the authorities and gets permission from them. They get the stamps, they pay the fees, they get permission, and then you make an arrangement with your various people who are building this. The Shtapati makes if there was a Shtapati, but we call them architects now, he makes a arrangement with all the builders, and then they go to the site, and they mark the site with lines, ribbons, chalk, and whatever, and then comes a machine and strips the vegetation off the land. The birds' nests fall to the ground, the animals are chased off, and the ground smells of raw earth. When the ground smells of raw earth, then construction is allowed, then construction is prepared. So if you think about the two ways of approaching it, in our system, permission is like I'm asking myself as a human. I'm saying, can I do this? Oh, yes, I can. Whereas in the Manasara and Vastu, you go outside that. I'm sure most of you know that, and most of you have come across it, but I think we undervalue how serious that really is. The right to take from nature is basically unquestioned. In India, that sense of righteous entitlement is not as absolute as in places like where I've lived, where I've worked before, as Austria, Germany, Europe, and in Canada for sure. Canada's famous for its forests and trees, but we spend a huge amount of effort cutting them down. And they are getting less, just as everywhere. In fact, we need to remember humanity has all its parts and possibilities everywhere. And it is not a linear structure. Nature is not about linear structures. I came from a culture that has little to do with what I'm telling today, yet there are many people I know who are heading in this way from all sides. This is the Manasara, I forgot that slide. In India, there is a culture of spirituality that extends back into the mists of time, not to mention prayer and acts of humility that are of a religious nature. All manner of ritual tie us to times that included values essentially to essential values that are not supported in today's technological machine age's culture, as well as to a plethora of actions that intend our higher nature and our higher aspiration. These always remain with us, at least latent. These are true for other cultures too, but we are in India right now. And I think India is a very, very good example. In fact, it may be the best. Even in case such actions are not often fully appreciated or respected, and are social norms and are done as a matter of course. It is perhaps at a minimum today, but it is not extinguished. So I ask the question, who would we get permission from to fundamentally alter a plot of land or take work from in each individual case? How would we do that? Ecosystems are collapsing around us. However one looks at it, it turns out that technology we use is traumatic to our planet. The evidence that the actions we are taking are destructive not only to nature, but to humanity and to human nature is so profound that it is actually shocking how little we do about it. Even in as highly regulated and scientific countries as Germany, the ecosystems are collapsing. Now, I referenced it like this, that we're not reacting because we're thinking in terms of ecosystems and sustainability, which is something that we have created. In Germany, despite a great effort at sustainability and regulation and science, the ecosystems are collapsing. The insect mass in Germany has dropped to 25% of 10 years ago. There may be clean rivers, but there is nothing in them but water. 9 in 10 birds in Europe and North America have gone over the last 50 years. There's only one bird left for every 10 from when I was born. Perhaps this is because technological methods are more fully ubiquitous in those areas. Due to the ubiquitous approach to technology, the natural world is also thought as ecosystems. It follows that such ecosystems do not represent the whole, although they claim holism because the science cannot measure the whole of its life. We measure it in terms of products and solutions to gravity, as in this diagram. A porous system will, however, let nature find its way to keep more of itself alive. In the past few weeks, we have seen that nature is very able and willing to change fast. With crisp blue skies everywhere, the canals of Venice are already clear, and we can see the fish and crabs on the sandy bottom. This is astonishing to me. I lived in Venice for a year, and the idea that you could actually see the bottom and see crabs and fish in there is like beyond belief. I can't believe that it works that well. But here's a picture. This is a recent news picture showing the bottom of the water underneath the gondola in Venice. The canals are, in fact, the sewage system for Venice. We also have the Himalayas visible from places where it hasn't been seen for a generation. And in North America, forest creatures live in the suburbs and in the urban front and backyards, eating all their flowers, chewing on the grass, sleeping because people don't come out. But they're back. We thought there weren't any, but there are hundreds of them living in the streets. We like to claim sustainability as our goal and set targets at least a generation ahead. But sustainability is mitigation of technological destruction by the same thinking that causes the destruction. It is hedging, and that hedging is done reluctantly. We can act much faster by stopping what we know is harmful. Finance, budgets, ministries, and economy, these are our inventions, our tools. We obviously control them. They are not in control of us. These are not beyond us, while nature is not under our control. India is different than the Western cultures whence technology is brought. I'm not saying it is the only place, but it is one place. On the one hand, seen afresh with Western eyes, many parts of India can seem to be in constant state of disorder and trauma. Organization and unity are present in one way and not in another that a newcomer may expect to see. Technology is an import here and is not really taken up fully, not in the spirit of ubiquitous need at the foundation of the culture. Technology is more porous here. In light of the destruction of the planet's life, we witness and we see evidence of, in the future, to be less technological in the modern sense is to be ahead. This does not mean that technology available to us is to be discarded. This is hardly possible, nor is it desirable. But if I cannot have a cup of tea without collateral death and destruction to the environment and the gentle creatures in it as part of the price of that cup, then we can change how we get our tea. There is, in fact, nothing to lose. I often use the term after technology architecture. It is inspired by the architect Rem Koolhaas, who wrote a paper called Bigness in this book. It was published in this book, where he proposes that the size of the projects that we need and must do as facilitated by technology, which means on all levels, financial as well as structural, production, and so on, gives results that exit our ability and our tools' ability to predict the outcome. He says that it is the end of purpose in architecture. But two things stand out. One is that this unknown outcome, according to technology, is nevertheless recognized by Rem Koolhaas and many other people. People recognize it. They know what happened. The technology can't predict it. That's all. The other thing is that purpose is not technology driven, which relates to the earlier statement about technology having purpose, not having purpose. Kohlhaas calls this new period after architecture, not after technology, but after architecture. But architecture is certainly not dependent on technology. It has clearly been a part of human life and cultures for much longer than our technology of today, even before the techne of the ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago. So the term I use is after technology architecture. I don't know what that is yet, but there are elements that we can find. And I do have a 5-point program to develop the projects accordingly to evolve that. The relationship to technology is so much different for engineers and scientists than architects. Seen from the engineering side, this seems as if to speak nonsense to say that technology will end. However, if we see that nature has its ways that transcend systems and operations logic, that its ways are multivalent in a way that no human can ever really understand, that nature in every part of its ways is an infinite treasure trove of new and potential ideas, then I propose a technology that allies itself with nature as its ultimate partner, not a resource. Engineering will be transformed, but architecture will come into its own. Rather than robbing nature to make entities that so often end up poisoning us, let us find new ways of growing and evolving with the security of nature. Nature is secure because within the laws of life, it will not poison, it will not divide, and it will not be disharmonious. Nature, understood as one law, perhaps as one being, provides us with a form of being that is safe. The trick is to learn again how to know it as a brother and guide, or sister and guide. We must already actually know it intimately as we are already a part of it. How do we find that knowledge? There is more knowledge than we can replace in nature than our man-made knowledge, even over a millennia of development, can equal. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra makes it clear that the human knowledge that we create is not only flawed, but it exists for the benefit in getting rid of it. That's paraphrasing very heavily, but I would stand behind it. Krishnamurti told it in his way, stating that we have invented a perception of increments, time, and all the things that we measure in the earth and in the sky, increments of the things that we see in the world. We measure everything in increments to make it real for ourselves, technologically. We have internalized that, thinking that we need time and process to do things in our minds and in our thinking. He said that process is merely to delay the outcome that our mind will provide. So within us, process and increment he says, is irrelevant. He said that process is, it does not support, our mind gets its solutions instantaneously, he is saying, but we have absorbed this process in ourselves. And now we project that incrementalization, that idea of process, on the world. So we see the world and we see day and night, we see time passing. We create structures to understand it. We internalize those structures and then we project them on the world. This is another way of saying what the Yoga Sutra says, that the human knowledge is not healthy and that we have a job to deal with it and remove it. This includes our ideas about bodies, community, our culture, and spans from concepts of time through war and to all the creatures that live on the planet. Our lives are based in mind that is created in nature. And just as nature needs all of its parts, it needs the mind. The human mind itself is created within nature's purpose. The antecedents of India's cultural patrimony are essentially based in the need for each of us to find the purpose of mind in our life as the quest for reaching the highest quality of living consciously. Hence, technology is not at India's base. Technology is not the foundation of India's cultures. I don't feel it is anywhere the actual basis, but in most of our cultures, this is mute, invisible, concealed, unconcealed. And as it's concealing in technology, someday that is revealed for us. But how long until our cultures change? It is our behavior that defines the quality of life that we may live. There is a vast wealth in India and its myriad cultural branches that bears knowledge much greater than we embrace today. If more architects consider the need to transform the way we think technologically today by considering what its value really encompasses, we will transition to a world of well-being where nature is happy again, and it will look happy, and we will look happily upon. Human spiritual well-being must be vulnerable to the harm that we see evinced in collapsing ecosystems and dying species around us as part of nature. We are part of nature. We are not part of nature by our own decisions. This idea of separation naturally leads to denial and hedging on change. Architecture as a profession is a weakened entity these days. It is fully cloaked in technological values. Architecture, being original to consciousness and its service, is at heart part of nature. It is our role to use our minds in the space we live in. As we harm ourselves and nature, the profession is also harmed. As such, architecture is both more valuable than ever now, and it is on its back foot. We have striven as a profession to absorb and wield the power of modern technology for generations. Now, it is, as we find with so many things, not healthy at all. We are off balance as a profession, cloaked in what amounts to a destructive force, or at least cloaked in a very heavy apparel. We will need to do in the means available to evolve an after-technology architecture. The goal in architecture is the goal in life. It is the same. The difference is only that one serves the other. Soon, we will transcend survival, since it is entirely in our own hands. To do that and move beyond, we will need to understand the goal. That's it.
Dr. Michael? Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much, Dr. Michael. Uh, so the session is up to 12:30 and we have some time for the question answers now. There is one question from Amity University, Kolkata, Professor Amira Salam. I'll just take a question.
Should I unshare? I will unshare my screen.
Yeah, there is. I'll just read the question. So she asked, what kind of architecture can we focus on, or is advisable to conserve or protect our own ecosystem, keeping in mind the current scenario of the world, which is facing a huge pandemic?
Well, one of the problems is that we are just like 150 years ago, we're at the very beginning of discovering new forms for architecture. 150 years ago, all these new technologies came in, and when a beam of steel or iron is there, or a truss, then the brick becomes completely different. Or also we can talk about painting and photography. Things completely shifted, and we found new forms, only to find that it's not working very well technologically, which I talked about here. So now we have a situation where for 2 months, in a lot of areas technologically, we backed off suddenly, and it's a brilliant experiment, isn't it? I mean, I showed the canal in Venice, and the air, everybody knows the effect in seconds. We wouldn't have believed the effect is so big in some places, to just simply stop doing what is harmful. So I think that as an architect, if you know that the production of concrete is one of the two most intractable issues along with flying, along with air traffic, in terms of polluting the air. Don't use it. Don't use it. Imagine that you can design a building without concrete. Just don't use it. And similarly for plastic, we're now discovering, I read the other day that in England, they're measuring that plastic, tiny particles of plastic are blowing in the ocean wind. There's so much plastic in the ocean now that is literally coming out of the water with evaporated water. And when you go and take a walk in the clean air on the beach, you're breathing more plastic than you would inside your house. So don't use it. Or find ways to use plastic, which is, long-term and very, very high value. Simply recycling and thinking about sustainability has turned out to be, as I said, hedging. It doesn't seem to make a difference. I think the idea is to simply actually stop using these things and to go into a mode where we have to discover new ways of building, or in a lot of cases, rediscover old ways of building. That's how I would position that at this time. We're at a beginning. It's a beginning.
Yeah. There's one more question from a student. He says, he asks, technology solution for all our problems. So why do you think it is pointless?
Can you repeat, please?
It's written, technology solution to all our problems. So why do you think technology is pointless?
No, okay. First of all, I said that technology is always based on problems and solutions. The actual advent of technology is based on problems and solutions. But a lot of the purposes we put technology to end up appearing quite pointless. And my example was the Seagram Building, which is a technological marvel, but it's solving problems about its own problems. It's not actually, it's a very tough question to figure out why you would have to spend so much money and so much technology to do this. It's not very efficient. So that's the one side. The other side is that technology is not pointless in a pure sense. It is, or in a practical sense, it does solve a lot of problems. But I was asked the other day when I gave a talk similar to this, saying that, okay, technology in agriculture saved India from, technology is definitively active in saving perhaps millions or tens of millions of people from famine. And my answer is that, well, the problem didn't start with the famine. The problem started long before the famine happened. And it's arguable that the reason for the famine was technological abuse of the systems that existed, the harmonious systems that existed, breaking it down without concern for the whole. And then you get to a position where people are starving, and then you bring in more technology, and yes, they're saved. In that case, it's perfectly useful. But the trick is to understand the wider scene, and we struggle with that. So in this question, two things were mixed together, and I would hold them separately.
So I have few more questions on my WhatsApp, but there is one here on the chat box by architect Radha Krishna. He is a faculty at MIT University Gurugram. He says, he said, Dr. Michael said that we architects make the world with the help of technology. But my question is a bit with the trend of academics. In this webinar, most of us are academicians. And in India, an academician architect is not allowed to practice in the field. What are your comments on this?
Well, I don't really agree with that. I'm a big advocate of design build teaching, meaning, I don't know if you're familiar with design build. The concept is that the students actually are engaged in real world issues, and design build is actually a misnomer because design build is always includes community, where you have to actually come to terms with an issue in the community, make a design and produce this thing. And as a component of education, that's really important. And if so I'm an advocate for mixing it in that way, that you actually have professional academicians who, as architects, actually can work with their hands. Like They can show the student how to put the brick down. You can get someone, a professional, to do it for you as well, and you can stand there and say, this is how a brick is laid. But you actually are teaching the students to do the work themselves. I'm a big advocate of that because, but in the Indian context, it's just a different world. You know, in Europe and in America, the guy laying the tiles, or especially in Europe, he will have a 2-year diploma about tiles. Here, that's not the case. The whole thing is in a different direction. The second aspect is, I personally do not see any problem at all with having an academician who has his own office. This is common across the world. I'm not familiar with why they would disallow that. That's my answer to that.
Yeah.
Two-part answer.
Yeah, two-part answer. So I think we are kind of out of time now. And thank you very much, Dr. Michael. In this time of COVID and lockdown, where all the systems are getting rebooted and many of the human interventions, the problems because of human interventions are kind of getting back to normal. And thanks for awakening us and reminding us of our culture of spirituality and giving us a new direction of looking ahead while we go into practice. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom, and we
Thank
look
you.
forward to more interactions with you in future. Thank you so much, Dr. Mike.
Okay. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.